Sorry, I brought my baby. The maid apologized to bring baby on her work, but what the billionaire did. The pre-dawn darkness still clung to the Manhattan streets as Maria Rodriguez stood outside the towering glass building, her heart hammering against her ribs. In her arms, 9-month-old Sophia slept peacefully, completely unaware of her mother's mounting panic. Maria checked her phone again. 5:47 a.m. She had 13 minutes before her shift started, 13 minutes before she had to face her employer and potentially lose everything. The emergency call from the daycare had come at midnight. A burst pipe had flooded the facility, and it would be closed for at least 3 days. Maria had spent the dark hours cycling through every option, calling every friend, every distant relative, anyone who might help. But Mrs. Chun was visiting family in California. Yolanda was working double shifts at the hospital. Her cousin Rosa had 3 kids of her own, and the flu running through her household. One by one, every door had closed. She'd thought about calling in sick, but she couldn't afford to. She'd already missed 2 days last month when Sophia had an ear infection. Her supervisor had been understanding then, but Maria knew she was pushing the limits of patience. More importantly, she desperately needed this job. The pay as a maid in one of Manhattan's most exclusive residential buildings was the best she'd ever earned. It covered Sophia's daycare, their tiny studio apartment in Queens, and left just enough for food and diapers. Barely enough, but enough. As Maria rode the service elevator to the 32nd floor, she rehearsed what she would say. Mr. Whitmore, Alexander Whitmore, was her primary client. At 32, he was the youngest self-made billionaire in New York's tech industry, and his penthouse suite was her responsibility 3 days a week. The agency had been explicit. Mr. Whitmore valued his privacy and his space. No interruptions, no excuses, no complications. Maria had been cleaning his home for 8 months, and in all that time, they'd barely exchanged 100 words. He was always polite, distant, absorbed in his work. Sometimes she'd arrive to find him still at his desk from the night before, surrounded by computer screens displaying code she couldn't begin to understand. He'd nod at her, grab his coffee, and disappear into his office. That was their routine. That was the boundary she was about to cross. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. Maria stepped into the private foyer, Sophia stirring slightly in her arms. She pulled out her key card with trembling fingers and opened the door to the penthouse. The space always took her breath away, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, minimalist furniture that probably cost more than she'd earn in a decade, art on the walls that she'd once Googled and found sold for millions. She quickly set up Sophia's portable bassinet in the small alcove near the service entrance, tucking a blanket around her daughter and praying she'd sleep for at least another hour. Then Maria grabbed her cleaning supplies and started her routine, working as quickly and quietly as possible, glancing back at Sophia every few minutes. She was dusting the living room when she heard footsteps. Maria's stomach dropped. Mr. Whitmore usually slept until at least 7:30 on the days she cleaned. But there he was, emerging from the hallway in sweatpants and a t-shirt, dark hair disheveled, stopping short when he saw her. "Good morning, Mr. Whitmore," Maria said, her voice barely steady. "I apologize for..." Then Sophia cried. It wasn't a full wail, just a small sound of waking, but in the quiet of the morning, it echoed through the cavernous space like an alarm. Maria watched Mr. Whitmore's eyes widen, watched him look past her to the alcove where the bassinet was visible. "Is that..." he started. "I'm so sorry," Maria interrupted, the words tumbling out. "My daycare had an emergency closure, and I couldn't find anyone to watch her, and I know this is completely inappropriate and unprofessional, but I couldn't miss work, and I promise she won't be any trouble. I'll work faster. I'll make up the time, please, She stopped because Sophia's cry had turned into a full wail. Maria rushed to the bassinet, lifting her daughter and rocking her, murmuring soothing words in Spanish. Behind her, she felt Mr. Whitmore's presence, could sense him standing there, probably calculating how quickly he could call the agency and have her replaced. "I'm sorry," Maria repeated, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry." Alexander Whitmore stood frozen in his living room, watching the woman who'd been cleaning his home for months transform before his eyes. Maria had always been nearly invisible to him, a quiet, efficient presence who maintained his space and disappeared. He'd never really looked at her, never really seen her as a person with a life beyond his walls. Now she stood there with tears threatening to spill from her eyes, holding a crying baby, and he felt something crack open inside his chest. The baby's cries intensified, and Maria began swaying in that universal motion of desperate parents everywhere. "Show me more, shoo," she whispered, her voice thick with stress. "Mommy's here, it's okay." Alexander's mind raced. His first instinct was to be angry. This was a violation of their arrangement, an intrusion into his carefully controlled space. But watching Maria's face, seeing the fear and exhaustion there, something else emerged. A memory, distant but sharp. His own mother, working 2 jobs after his father left, bringing him to her office cleaning job at night because she had no other choice. He'd been 5 years old, sitting in supply closets with a coloring book, trying to be quiet, trying to be good, trying not to be a burden. "How old is she?" Alexander heard himself ask. Maria looked up, surprise flickering across her face. 9 months. Her name is Sophia. "I promise, Mr. Whitmore, this won't happen again. I'll find someone by tomorrow. I just need today, please." "Has she eaten?" he interrupted. "What?" Maria blinked. "Has she had breakfast?" Alexander moved closer, and Sophia's cries began to quiet as she looked at him with wide, curious eyes. "Babies this age eat around 6, right? My sister has 3 kids. I remember when the youngest was about this size." Maria stared at him as if he'd started speaking another language. I was going to feed her while you were in the shower. I brought her bottles and food. I have everything. I won't need to use any of your." "Maria," Alexander said, and realized it might be the first time he'd used her first name. "It's okay. You can take care of her." "But my work can wait 30 minutes while you feed your daughter." He ran a hand through his hair, suddenly aware of how ridiculous this formality was. Here was a woman clearly at the end of her rope, apologizing for the fact that she was human, that she had responsibilities beyond making his bed and cleaning his floors. When had he become the kind of person who made people feel they had to apologize for that? Maria's eyes filled with tears, and she quickly looked away. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much." Alexander nodded and turned to go, then stopped. "The kitchen," he said. "Feed her in the kitchen. The breakfast nook has good light. And he hesitated. "There's a high chair in storage. 3rd door, on the left in the hallway. My nephew used it when he visited last Christmas." He walked to his bedroom, closing the door behind him, and leaned against it. Through the walls, he could hear Maria's soft voice talking to Sophia, could hear the baby's contented babbling. When had his home become so quiet that those sounds felt foreign? When had he become so isolated that human presence felt like an intrusion rather than a connection? After his shower, Alexander dressed, but didn't head to his office as usual. Instead, he found himself drawn to the kitchen. Maria had Sophia in the high chair. She must have retrieved it while he was showering, and was spooning something that looked like mashed banana into the baby's mouth. Sophia was making a glorious mess, bananas smeared across her cheeks, her tiny hands grabbing at the spoon. "She likes to feed herself," Maria said apologetically, noticing him in the doorway. "I'm sorry about the mess." "It's fine." Alexander poured himself coffee and, surprising himself, sat down at the counter across from them. Sophia looked at him and smiled, a wide gummy grin that showcased 4 tiny teeth. Something in his chest tightened. "How long have you been doing this alone?" he asked. Maria's hands stilled. "Since I was 3 months pregnant." "Her father?" "Gone." Maria's voice was flat. "He wanted me to," he said. "He wasn't ready for a baby. When I told him I was keeping her, he left. I haven't heard from him since." Alexander watched her wipe Sophia's face with a gentleness that spoke of exhausted but infinite patience. "That must be incredibly hard." "It is," Maria admitted, and he was struck by her honesty. "But she's worth it. Every difficult day, every impossible choice, Every moment I think I can't do this anymore, I look at her and I know she's worth it. They sat in silence for a moment, Sophia babbling happily between them. Alexander found himself thinking about his own journey to success, the 80-hour weeks, the risks, the sacrifices. He'd always been proud of how hard he'd worked. But he'd had advantages: parents who could help with rent when his startup was failing, connections from his Ivy League education, the safety net of being young and unmarried with no one depending on him. If he failed alone. Maria had no safety net. She was navigating motherhood and survival with the same determination he'd brought to building his company, but without any of his advantages. And she was doing it while cleaning his toilets and apologizing for the fact that her child existed. "What time do you usually finish here?" Alexander asked. "Around 2, Maria said. Then I have another client at 3:30 across town and one more in the evening. 3 jobs in one day. For on Tuesdays and Thursdays." She said it matter-of-factly, without self-pity. "Daycare closes at 6, so I time everything carefully. My neighbor watches Sophia from 6 to 8 on the days I work late. I pay her what I can." Alexander did quick math in his head. The agency paid their cleaners a fraction of what clients paid the agency itself. Maria was probably working 60 or 70 hours a week for what was likely still barely above minimum wage, once all the fees and cuts were taken out. "Do you like cleaning?" he found himself asking. Maria looked at him with surprise, then something like amusement crossed her face. "Do I like it? No one's ever asked me that before." "I'm asking." She considered the question seriously. "I like that I'm good at it. I like seeing something dirty become clean, seeing order come from chaos. There's satisfaction in that. But what I really wanted—" She trailed off, shaking her head. "It doesn't matter." "Tell me." "I wanted to be a nurse," Maria said quietly. "I was 2 years into a nursing program when I got pregnant. I couldn't afford tuition and daycare, so I had to choose. I tell myself maybe someday, when Sophia's in school, I can go back. But by then I'll be so far behind, and there's always another bill, another emergency." She straightened her shoulders. "But this is good work. Honest work. I'm lucky to have it." Alexander nodded slowly, but his mind was racing. He'd built a company worth billions by seeing problems and creating solutions, by recognizing inefficiencies and fixing them. Right now, he was looking at a massive inefficiency. A smart, hard-working woman with clear potential, trapped in a cycle where she could barely breathe, let alone advance. More than that, he was seeing a child, Sophia, with her banana-smeared grin and curious eyes, who deserved better than to be apologized for, better than to be a secret her mother had to hide. "Maria," he said slowly, an idea forming. "What would you say if I told you I have a problem that you might be able to help me solve?" She looked at him warily. "What kind of problem?" "I need someone I can trust," he said. "Someone responsible, detail-oriented, discreet. Someone who can manage my home, my schedule, coordinate with vendors and staff, handle the 1,000 small things that keep slipping through the cracks while I'm building a company. A house manager, essentially. It would be full-time, but regular hours. 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. Benefits, paid vacation, sick days. And it would pay enough that you wouldn't need 3 other jobs." Maria stared at him. "Mr. Whitmore, I'm not qualified for." "You're more qualified than you think. You've been managing your life under impossible circumstances. You've been managing multiple jobs, a baby, and presumably everything else life throws at you, and you're still here, still trying, still showing up. That's exactly the kind of person I need." "But Sophia would come to work with you," Alexander said, the plan crystallizing in his mind. "There's a guest room on the ground floor that's never used. We convert it into a nursery. You work while she plays or naps. When she's old enough for preschool, we'll find a good one nearby. This place is huge and empty. Why shouldn't there be some life in it?" Tears were streaming down Maria's face now. "Why would you do this? You don't even know me." Alexander thought about that. Why was he doing this? Part of it was the memory of his mother, the guilt of his privilege, the recognition of a debt unpaid to all the people who'd worked in the shadows of his success. But it was more than that. Sitting here in his pristine kitchen, watching this baby make a mess of her breakfast while her mother tried not to cry, he felt more human than he had in months. When had his success started to feel like a prison? When had his achievement become synonymous with isolation? "Maybe it's time I did," he said simply. The next 2 weeks transformed Alexander Whitmore's life in ways he never could have anticipated. Maria accepted his offer with trembling hands and tears of relief, but it quickly became clear that she'd never learned to simply accept help without trying to earn it tenfold. She arrived at 8:30 the first morning, half an hour early, with Sophia in a stroller loaded with supplies, looking nervous but determined. "I prepared a full inventory of the penthouse," she said, handing him a typed document. "Kitchen supplies, linens, everything. And I researched house manager duties online last night. I can start learning your preferences for meals, managing your calendar if you need that, coordinating with." "Maria," Alexander interrupted gently. "Breathe. We'll figure it out as we go." But Maria couldn't seem to stop trying to prove herself worthy of this opportunity. While the contractors worked on converting the ground floor guest room into a nursery, she worked twice as hard as necessary, often with Sophia strapped to her back in a carrier. She organized his closets with military precision, created systems for his mail and packages, and started preparing simple lunches without being asked. "You don't have to cook," Alexander told her on the third day, finding her in the kitchen making what smelled like homemade soup while Sophia played with wooden spoons on a blanket nearby. "I want to," Maria insisted. "You're giving me so much. The least I can do is take the job I offered you, not try to do 5 jobs to justify it." He sat down on the floor next to Sophia, who immediately grabbed his finger with surprising strength. "You're not a charity case, Maria. You're an employee with skills I need. Stop trying to prove something that doesn't need proving." It was a lesson he had to repeat in various ways over those first days. But slowly, Maria began to relax, began to trust that this wasn't some elaborate setup that would be snatched away. And as she relaxed, Alexander discovered he was enjoying the presence of another person in his space in ways he'd never expected. Sophia was a revelation. At 9 months old, she was just starting to pull herself up on furniture, babbling in that language that sounded almost like real conversation. She had her mother's dark eyes and a personality that was emerging more clearly each day. Curious, determined, surprisingly funny. She'd figured out that when she dropped her toys, adults would pick them up, and she found this game endlessly entertaining. Alexander found himself on the floor more than he'd been in years, handing toys back to a giggling baby, making ridiculous faces to hear her laugh. He started keeping his office door open so he could hear Sophia's babbling and Maria's soft singing in Spanish. Sometimes, when a conference call was particularly tedious, he'd mute himself and just watch them through the doorway, Maria dancing with Sophia in her arms, or reading to her in that melodic mix of English and Spanish, or simply holding her while she napped, looking peaceful in a way she never had during those first months when she'd been hiding her daughter's existence. The nursery was completed on a Friday, and Alexander had insisted on being involved in the setup. He'd called his sister Catherine for advice, enduring her shocked and delighted interrogation about why her bachelor billionaire brother was suddenly interested in nursery furniture. "I'm helping an employee," he'd said, trying to sound professional. "Uh-huh," Catherine had replied knowingly. "And this employee just happens to be a single mother you're going out of your way to support? Alex, please tell me you're not being weird about this." "I'm being helpful, not weird." "Good. Because if your help comes with expectations." "It doesn't," Alexander had said firmly. "Catherine, I'm trying to do something good here. Can you help me or not?" She'd helped, sending him links to everything from cribs to changing tables to toys appropriate for Sophia's age. Alexander had bought it all, then bought more: a rocking chair for Maria, a small bookshelf that he'd filled with children's books, soft rugs, and colorful wall decorations. When Maria saw the finished room, she'd sat down in the rocking chair and cried. "This is too much," she'd whispered. "It's what she needs," Alexander had replied. "What you both need." But it wasn't just the nursery that was changing the penthouse. Maria had started adding small touches throughout the space: fresh flowers in the entryway, photos of Sophia in simple frames in her work area, a warmth that had been missing from the sterile perfection. And Alexander found he didn't mind. The place felt less like a showcase and more like a home. His friends and colleagues were starting to notice something different about him, too. At a business dinner the second week, his CFO Marcus had remarked that Alexander seemed lighter somehow, less stressed. "I can't remember the last time I saw you smile at your phone," Marcus said. "New girlfriend?" Alexander had looked down to see he'd been grinning at a photo Maria had sent him, Sophia covered in spaghetti sauce, looking ridiculously pleased with herself. "Just a friend," he'd said, but even he could hear how insufficient that description was. The truth was more complicated. Maria wasn't just an employee, and this wasn't just a business arrangement, but neither was it a romance. It was something else entirely, a connection that was forming in the quiet moments of shared space, in the gradual building of trust between two people who'd started as strangers. He learned about her in pieces, that she'd grown up in the Bronx, daughter of immigrants from Honduras, that her father had died when she was 12, and her mother when she was 23, that she had no siblings, no extended family in the States, that she'd been entirely alone when Sophia was born, had gone through labor with only a nurse's hand to hold, that the baby's father had been a fellow nursing student she'd thought loved her, until the pregnancy test changed everything. "I used to be angry about it," Maria told him one afternoon. They were sitting in the living room, Alexander supposedly working on his laptop, Maria folding laundry while Sophia practiced pulling herself up on the coffee table. About Juan leaving, about having to drop out of school, about all the plans that disappeared. "But I can't be angry anymore. Being angry takes energy I don't have, and Sophia deserves better than a bitter mother." "You're allowed to be angry and still be a good mother," Alexander said. "Maybe. But I'd rather use that energy to build something better for her. That's why this job." She paused, folding one of Sophia's tiny shirts with careful precision. "You've given me something I didn't think I'd ever have again. Hope. The possibility of a future that's about more than just surviving day to day." That evening, after Maria and Sophia had left for the day, Alexander had insisted Maria use a car service, now rather than navigating the subway with a baby and all her supplies. He sat in the living room and looked at the toys scattered on his expensive rug, the burp cloth draped over his designer couch, the baby handprints on his pristine windows. 6 months ago, these things would have horrified him. Now they felt right, like his home was finally being lived in rather than just occupied. He thought about the silence that had surrounded him for so long, the emptiness that he'd mistaken for peace. He'd been successful by every external measure, but somewhere along the way, he'd forgotten that success without connection was just an expensive form of loneliness. His phone buzzed with a message from Catherine. "Mom would be proud of what you're doing." "I am too." Alexander looked at the photo he'd saved of Sophia covered in spaghetti sauce and found himself smiling again. He was beginning to realize that helping Maria and Sophia wasn't just changing their lives. It was changing his too. 3 weeks into the new arrangement, Alexander's sister Catherine showed up unannounced at the penthouse on a Saturday morning. Alexander opened the door in jeans and a t-shirt, surprised by the visit but unsurprised by Catherine's determination to see what her brother was up to. Behind him, Sophia was babbling loudly from her playpen, and Maria was in the kitchen making weekend brunch, something that had become their routine on the Saturdays when Maria agreed to work a few hours to help him prepare for Monday meetings. "I had to see this with my own eyes," Catherine announced, walking past him and stopping short when she saw the transformation of her brother's once pristine penthouse. There were toys in a basket by the couch, children's books on the coffee table, and a baby girl standing in a playpen, bouncing excitedly at the sight of a new person. Maria emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel, clearly nervous. "Hello, you must be Mr. Whitmore's sister. He mentioned you might visit. I'm Maria, and this is Sophia." Catherine's expression softened immediately. She walked over to the playpen where Sophia was reaching up with grabby hands. "May I?" she asked Maria, who nodded. Catherine lifted Sophia into her arms with the easy confidence of an experienced mother, and Sophia responded by immediately grabbing her earring. "I like her," Catherine declared, gently extracting her jewelry from Sophia's determined grip. She's got good taste. These are real diamonds. She turned to Alexander. Can we talk? They stepped out onto the terrace while Maria stayed inside with Sophia. The Manhattan skyline stretched before them, but Catherine's attention was entirely on her brother. Alex, what are you doing? She asked, but her tone wasn't accusatory. It was curious, concerned. I'm helping someone who needed help, he said simply. You're doing more than that. You've fundamentally reorganized your life around a woman and her baby you barely knew a month ago. I'm not judging. I'm just trying to understand. Alexander leaned against the railing, searching for the right words. Do you remember when Mom used to take me to her cleaning jobs? When Dad left and money was so tight, she couldn't afford a babysitter? Of course. You were 5. I was 12. I was old enough to stay home alone, but you weren't. I remember her apologizing to every client, every single time. I'm so sorry about my son. He won't be any trouble. Please don't fire me. She was so afraid all the time. And I remember promising myself that when I grew up, when I had money and power, I would never make anyone feel that way. Catherine's eyes filled with understanding. And then Maria showed up with Sophia, apologizing. Exactly. And I saw Mom in her face, Catherine. That same fear, that same desperation, that same exhausting strength. And I realized I'd become the kind of person who made people feel they had to apologize for being human, for having needs, for having children. How did that happen? When did I become so removed from the reality most people live in? Oh, Alex, Catherine said softly. You're not that person. You just forgot for a while. But I need to know, what are your intentions here? With Maria? Intentions? Alexander frowned. I'm her employer. I'm helping her because it's the right thing to do. And you don't have any feelings for her beyond that? Alexander was quiet for a moment, watching through the window as Maria played with Sophia, making the baby laugh with exaggerated expressions. Did he have feelings? Yes, but they were complicated, undefined. He admired Maria's strength, her dedication to her daughter, the warmth she'd brought into his life. He enjoyed her company, looked forward to their conversations, found himself thinking about her and Sophia when they weren't there. But he was also acutely aware of the power dynamic, of how any romantic overture from him could make her feel pressured or obligated. I care about them both, he finally said. But I'm not going to pursue anything that might make Maria uncomfortable or feel like her job is conditional on something other than her work. She's rebuilding her life, Catherine. The last thing she needs is her employer complicating things. Catherine studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Good. Because that little girl in there deserves stability, and her mother deserves respect and safety. If you can give them both those things without expecting anything in return, then you really are Mom's son. They went back inside to find Maria had set out brunch. Nothing fancy, just scrambled eggs, toast, fruit, and coffee, but the table looked inviting in a way Alexander's formal dining room never had before. Catherine insisted Maria join them, and over the meal, the two women began to form their own connection. How old are your kids? Maria asked, balancing Sophia on her lap while trying to eat with one hand. 13, 11, and 8. All boys. Complete chaos, I swear. Here, let me take her. You need to eat with both hands. Catherine reached for Sophia, who went willingly, fascinated by this new person. As the women chatted, Alexander watched them and felt something shift in his understanding of what he was building here. He thought he was just helping Maria, but maybe he was creating something bigger, a chosen family of sorts, an expansion of the connections that made life meaningful. The weeks continued to unfold with an easy rhythm. Maria proved to be not just competent, but exceptional at managing his household and schedule. She anticipated needs before he articulated them, handled difficult vendors with diplomatic firmness, and somehow made everything run more smoothly than it ever had when he'd tried to manage it himself. But more than her professional skills, she brought a perspective that challenged him in productive ways. When he was stressed about a deal, she'd point out what really mattered. When he was obsessing over work at 9 p.m., she'd remind him that life existed outside of spreadsheets and code. And Sophia, Sophia was teaching him joy in a way nothing else had. The baby was growing rapidly now, becoming more mobile and interactive every day. She'd started saying "dada," which she seemed to apply to everyone male, including Alexander. The first time she'd pulled herself up on his leg and looked at him with that expectant smile, saying "dada," something in his chest had cracked wide open. She doesn't mean. Maria had started to apologize. I know, Alexander had said quickly, reaching down to steady Sophia. But I don't mind. One evening in the 5th week, Alexander came home from a late meeting to find the penthouse dark except for a lamp in the living room. It was past 8. Maria should have left hours ago. He found her on the couch, Sophia asleep on her chest, both of them clearly having dozed off. He stood in the doorway, taking in the scene. Maria's hair had fallen out of its ponytail, and she had one hand protectively cradled around Sophia's back. The baby was snoring softly, her tiny fist clutched in her mother's shirt. They looked peaceful, safe, and Alexander realized with stunning clarity that he wanted them to stay, not just as employees in his home, but as permanent fixtures in his life. The thought should have terrified him. 6 weeks ago, he'd been a confirmed bachelor, married to his work, content with his solitude. Now he was standing in his living room, reluctant to wake a sleeping woman and baby because he didn't want to disturb their peace, and the apartment they'd be going home to was a tiny studio in Queens where Maria deserved so much better. He must have made a sound because Maria's eyes fluttered open. She saw him and immediately looked embarrassed, trying to sit up without waking Sophia. I'm so sorry, Mr. Whitmore. We fell asleep. I should have. Alexander, he interrupted. After 5 weeks of sharing meals and having your daughter spit up on my shoulder, I think you can call me Alexander. And don't apologize. You both looked comfortable. Maria carefully stood, transferring Sophia to her shoulder. The baby barely stirred. We should go. It's late. Stay, Alexander found himself saying. Then, realizing how that sounded, he quickly added, I mean, it's late. Sophia's already asleep, and you'd have to wake her to get her home and settled. The nursery is here. Why not just stay the night? You both could use the rest. Maria hesitated, and Alexander could see her weighing the offer, trying to determine if there were hidden implications, whether this was appropriate. He wanted to tell her that his motives were pure, that he just wanted to help, but he was becoming aware that his feelings were becoming more complicated than simple altruism. Just as friends, he added quietly. As people who care about each other's well-being. Stay, Maria. Rest. Finally, she nodded. Thank you. For everything. You've been so kind to us, more than I ever imagined anyone could be. I don't know how I'll ever repay you. You already have, Alexander said, and meant it. You've reminded me what matters. That's worth more than you know. He helped her get Sophia settled in the nursery, then showed Maria to one of the guest rooms. As he lay in his own bed that night, knowing they were both just down the hall, Alexander acknowledged what he'd been avoiding. He was falling in love with both of them. With Sophia's laughter and her determined spirit, and the way she looked at him with complete trust. With Maria's strength and kindness, and the way she'd somehow seen through his wealth to the person underneath. But what terrified him most wasn't the depth of his feelings. It was the question of what to do with them. How did you tell someone you'd fallen in love with them when there was such an enormous power imbalance? When your help could be mistaken for manipulation? When they had every reason to fear that rejecting you might cost them everything they'd just gained? Alexander stared at the ceiling of his bedroom, listening to the unfamiliar but welcome sounds of other people in his home, and knew that whatever happened next, his life had already changed in ways he could never reverse. He didn't want to reverse them. He wanted more, but he wanted it only if Maria wanted it too, freely, without pressure or obligation. For now, he would have to be patient. He would continue to be her employer, her friend, the person who made sure she and Sophia had what they needed. And maybe, eventually, if the universe was kind, he might become something more. But that would be Maria's choice to make, and he would wait for as long as it took. The turning point came on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, in the most unexpected way. Alexander was working from home, participating in a video conference about a potential merger, when he heard Sophia scream, Not her usual fussy cry, but a sound of genuine pain and terror. He was out of his chair and running before conscious thought caught up. In the living room, he found Maria on her knees beside Sophia, who was lying on her back, her face red from crying. Blood trickled from her mouth. She fell, Maria said, her voice shaking. She was pulling up on the coffee table, and she slipped. She hit her mouth. There's so much blood, I don't know if she... Alexander was already on the phone with his personal physician, Dr. Chun, explaining the situation while kneeling beside them. Sophia's cries were lessening, but the blood was alarming. She's on her way, he said. She'll be here in 10 minutes. Let me see. Gently, carefully, he helped Maria examine Sophia's mouth. It looks like she bit her lip when she fell, he said, relief flooding through him even as Sophia continued to cry. Lip injuries bleed a lot, but they usually look worse than they are. See? It's already slowing down. Maria was crying now too, holding Sophia against her chest, rocking and murmuring in Spanish. I looked away for 1 second. 1 second. I was just answering an email you sent me about tomorrow's schedule, and she... This wasn't your fault, Alexander said firmly. Babies fall. My sister's kids all had injuries like this. It's terrifying, but it's normal. Dr. Chen arrived quickly and confirmed what Alexander had suspected. A minor split in Sophia's lip, no teeth damaged, nothing requiring stitches. She'd have a fat lip for a few days, but she would be fine. But the incident had shaken Maria to her core, and Alexander could see the fear that went beyond typical parental worry. After Dr. Chen left and Sophia had calmed down, falling asleep exhausted from the trauma, Maria sat on the couch looking shell-shocked. Alexander sat beside her, giving her space but staying close. I can't stop thinking about what could have happened, Maria said quietly. If she'd fallen differently, if she hit her head on the corner of the table, if... But she didn't. She's okay. This time. But what about next time? What if I'm not watching closely enough? What if I'm trying to do too much and something terrible happens because I'm not focused enough on her? Alexander heard something beneath her words, a deeper fear she wasn't quite articulating. Maria, what's really bothering you? She was quiet for a long moment, then the words came out in a rush. I'm terrified that you'll realize I'm not enough. That I can't be a good enough employee and a good enough mother at the same time. That you'll see me mess up, see me fail at juggling everything, and decide this arrangement isn't working. And then we'll lose all of this, the security, the stability, the future I was starting to believe in. And it won't be because you're cruel, but because I wasn't capable of doing what I promised I could do. You think I'd fire you because your baby fell while learning to walk? Alexander asked, genuinely shocked. I think that I've been poor long enough to know that security is an illusion. That everything can disappear in an instant. That even people who mean well can change their minds. Alexander felt something sharp pierce through him, the realization of just how much fear Maria still carried, how much his wealth and power still represented a threat to her even as he tried to help. He thought about privilege, about safety nets, about how he never had to live with the kind of precariousness that made every good thing feel temporary. Maria, look at me, he said gently. She turned toward him, tears still on her cheeks. You're not going to lose this. I'm not going to change my mind or decide you're not good enough. You're exactly good enough. More than good enough. And if you need to spend less time on work tasks and more time watching Sophia as she gets more mobile, then that's what you do. If you need to hire someone to help with the house management so you can focus on her, we'll do that. Whatever you and Sophia need, we figure it out together. Okay. Why? Maria whispered. Why do you care so much? I'm just a woman you hired to clean your house. Why are you going so far beyond what any employer would do? Alexander knew this was the moment, the choice between safe distance and honest vulnerability. He could deflect, keep things professional, maintain the boundaries that protected them both from complication. Or he could risk the truth. Because you're not just an employee anymore, he said quietly. Somewhere in the past 6 weeks, you and Sophia became important to me. Not because of what you do for me, but because of who you are. Because your presence has made my life better in ways I didn't even know I needed. Because when I come home now, this place feels like a home instead of just an address. Because he stopped, taking a breath. Because I care about you both. Deeply. And I don't want you to live in fear of losing what we've built here. Maria stared at him, her expression unreadable. Alexander, I don't know what you're saying. Do you have feelings for me? Yes, he admitted. But I need you to know that your job is not conditional on whether you have feelings for me in return. That's not why I'm telling you this. I'm telling you because you deserve to know why I care, why I want to protect you and Sophia, why I'm not going to suddenly change my mind or pull support away. My feelings for you are my problem to manage, not yours. Your security here doesn't depend on anything except you being yourself and taking care of Sophia. Do you understand? The silence stretched between them, loaded with possibility and danger. Finally, Maria spoke, her voice barely audible. When Juan left me, I promised myself I would never depend on anyone again. Never put my trust in someone who could destroy me. I built walls, Alexander. High ones. And then you came along with your kindness and your generosity and your penthouse and your willingness to have a baby disrupt your perfect life. And brick by brick, you've been dismantling those walls without even trying. I'm sorry, Alexander started, but Maria shook her head. Don't be. I'm not telling you to stop. I'm telling you that I'm scared. I'm scared of what it means that I look forward to seeing you every morning. That Sophia lights up when you walk in the room. That when I imagine the future now, you're in it, and that terrifies me because I don't know if that's real or if I'm just confusing gratitude with something else. What do you need? Alexander asked. Time? Space? What would help you figure out what you're feeling? Honesty, Maria said. Keep being honest with me. Don't hide behind the employer role if you're feeling something else. Don't pretend this is just a job if it isn't. Let me see the real you, so I can figure out if what I'm feeling is real too. I can do that, Alexander said. But Maria, I need you to promise me something. If at any point this becomes uncomfortable, if you decide you don't have romantic feelings for me, if you want to keep things purely professional, you have to tell me. And nothing will change about your employment or your security here. Can you trust me enough to believe that? Maria looked at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I'm going to try. That evening, after Maria had taken Sophia home, she still wasn't comfortable staying overnight unless absolutely necessary. Alexander sat in his living room and called Catherine. I told her, he said when his sister answered, about how I feel. And Catherine's voice was cautious. And she's scared. Understandably. But she didn't shut me down completely. She said she needs time to figure out if what she's feeling is real or just gratitude. Smart woman, Catherine observed. Alex, I need you to be really careful here. The power dynamic. I know. I've thought about nothing else. That's why I made it clear that her job security isn't connected to whether she has feelings for me. But can she really believe that? You're a billionaire. You could crush her with a phone call. How can she ever really feel safe saying no to you? I don't know, Alexander admitted, the weight of that reality settling heavily on him. Maybe she can't. Maybe I'm being selfish even telling her how I feel. But Catherine, what's the alternative? Pretend I don't feel anything? Let her believe this is just employer-employee charity when it's become so much more than that. No, Catherine said thoughtfully. Honesty is better. But you need to prove to her, through actions not just words, that her security doesn't depend on reciprocating your feelings. That might take a long time. Are you prepared for that? Yes, Alexander said without hesitation. However long it takes. Then show her. Not with grand gestures, but with consistency. Be the person she can count on, regardless of whether she ever becomes more than your employee and friend. Can you do that? Alexander looked around his living room at the scattered toys, the children's books, the evidence of life and love that had transformed his sterile space. Yes, he said, because she's already shown me how. She's been showing me since the day she showed up apologizing for the fact that her daughter existed. She showed me what real strength looks like, what dedication means, what it's like to put someone else's needs above your own comfort. I'm just trying to learn from her example. Good, Catherine said softly. Then maybe you both have a chance. After they hung up, Alexander went to the nursery and stood in the doorway, looking at the empty crib, imagining Sophia sleeping there, peaceful and safe. He thought about the journey that had brought them all to this point, Maria's desperation that first morning, Sophia's cry that had broken through his isolation, the gradual building of trust between two people from completely different worlds. He didn't know how this story would end. Maybe Maria would decide her feelings were just gratitude. Maybe she'd choose to keep things professional. Maybe she'd find someone else, someone who didn't carry the burden of wealth and power that made every interaction complicated. Or maybe, just maybe, they'd figure out how to bridge the gap between their different lives. Maybe trust would grow into something deeper. Maybe the unconventional family they'd started to build could become something real and lasting. For now, Alexander would do what he'd promised. Be honest, be consistent, be the person Maria and Sophia could count on. And if that was all he ever got to be in their lives, then he would find a way to be grateful for even that much. Because in 6 short weeks, they'd given him something he hadn't even known he was missing, a reason to come home that had nothing to do with work and everything to do with love. The next 2 months unfolded with careful grace. Alexander kept his promise, showing up consistently without pressure, letting Maria set the pace of their relationship's evolution. He was patient, attentive, and respectful of the boundaries she needed to feel safe. They fell into rhythms that felt natural despite their complexity. Morning coffee while Sophia ate breakfast, Alexander often holding her so Maria could drink her coffee with both hands. Lunch conversations about everything from politics to childhood memories to dreams for the future. Evenings when Alexander would come home from the office to find them still there, and he'd play with Sophia while Maria prepared dinner, not because she had to, but because she enjoyed cooking for people she cared about. Sophia was walking now, toddling around the penthouse with determination and joy, calling Ale. Her approximation of Alexander, when she saw him. She'd started calling him that instead of Dada, and Alexander treasured the nickname more than any professional accolade he'd ever received. Maria was blooming too, the constant exhaustion fading from her face as she settled into security for the first time in years. She smiled more easily, laughed more often, and slowly began to share deeper parts of herself. Her love of poetry, her talent for painting that she'd abandoned years ago, her dreams of one day opening a community center that helped single mothers navigate the challenges she'd faced. "Tell me more about that," Alexander had said one evening. They were sitting on his terrace after Sophia had gone to sleep in the nursery, drinking wine and watching the sunset paint the sky over Central Park. "It's probably silly," Maria demurred. "A pipe dream." "Dreams aren't silly if they mean something to you." So she told him about a place where single mothers could access childcare while attending classes, where they could learn job skills and get career counseling, where there would be legal aid and financial literacy training, and a community of women who understood the unique challenges of raising children alone. Her eyes had lit up as she talked, her hands gesturing expressively, and Alexander had found himself captivated not just by the vision, but by her passion. "What if we made it real?" he'd asked. "Alexander, something like that would cost." "I know what it would cost. I can afford it. But more importantly, you have the vision and the understanding of what these women need. This could be your path back to helping people, even if it's not as a nurse. This could be your purpose." Maria had looked at him with something that might have been love, and might have been hope, and might have been both. "You'd really do that? Fund something like this?" "I'd really do that. But Maria, I need you to understand. This wouldn't be about us, about our relationship or lack thereof. This would be because it's a good idea that could help people. If you decide tomorrow that you don't have romantic feelings for me, this opportunity doesn't go away." "Okay." She'd reached across the space between them and taken his hand. "You keep trying to protect me from you. Has it occurred to you that maybe I don't need that kind of protection anymore?" "What do you mean?" "I mean that for the first 2 months, I was constantly afraid. Afraid you'd take it all away, afraid I'd do something wrong, afraid you wanted something from me I couldn't give. But you've shown me, day after day, that your kindness isn't conditional. That you see me, really see me, Maria, not just the poor single mother you're helping. And somewhere along the way, I stopped being afraid and started being curious. Curious about what? Alexander's heart was pounding. About what it would be like to let myself feel what I've been fighting. About whether the walls I built to protect myself are actually just keeping me from something wonderful. They'd sat in the twilight, hands linked, both afraid to push too hard or too fast. Finally, Alexander had spoken. We have time. There's no rush. We can figure this out at whatever pace feels right to you. What if I said the pace that feels right is not quite so slow anymore? Maria had asked softly. That had been the beginning of something new, still careful, still mindful of Sophia's needs and the complexity of their situation, but allowing themselves to acknowledge what was growing between them. First dates that weren't quite dates because Sophia was there. Long conversations after she went to sleep. Tentative touches that became less tentative. Laughter that came easier. Trust that deepened day by day. Catherine had visited again, bringing her boys this time, and they'd all spent a chaotic, joyful day together. The children playing, the adults talking and laughing, and Alexander had looked around his transformed home and felt completely happy for perhaps the first time in his adult life. She's good for you, Catherine had said quietly while Maria was in the other room with the kids. You're different with her. More human. More like the brother I grew up with before you built your walls. I didn't realize I'd built walls. We all build walls after we've been hurt. Yours just happened to be made of success and solitude. She's teaching you how to let people in again. The first time Alexander kissed Maria was not dramatic or grand. It was simple, perfect in its ordinary sweetness. They'd been baking cookies with Sophia, a messy, flour-covered affair, and Sophia had fallen asleep in her high chair, exhausted from the excitement. Maria had been trying to wipe cookie dough off the baby's face, and she'd looked up at Alexander with flour in her hair and laughter in her eyes, and he'd kissed her without thinking, without planning, just a gentle press of lips that lasted maybe 3 seconds. Was that okay? He'd ask when he pulled back. Yes, Maria had breathed. Yes, it was okay. They'd moved slowly after that, both conscious that this was about more than just the two of them. Sophia had to be considered, protected, given time to adjust to what was changing. But the baby seemed to sense the shift in emotional weather and responded with delight, clapping her hands when she saw them holding hands, giggling when Alexander kissed her mother's cheek. One evening, 3 months after that first morning when Maria had shown up apologizing for bringing her baby to work, Alexander made dinner while Maria gave Sophia a bath. He'd been practicing his cooking skills, wanting to contribute more equally to their shared life. When they emerged, Sophia in pajamas, Maria with wet hair and tired eyes, he had the table set with candles and the simple pasta dish he'd managed not to burn. "What's this?" Maria asked, smiling. "A celebration." "Sit." She did, settling Sophia in her lap, and Alexander brought out the food. Over dinner, Sophia making a magnificent mess while attempting to feed herself, Alexander took Maria's hand. "I have something I want to talk to you about," he said. "But first, I need you to know that this is a conversation, not a demand or an expectation. You can say no, and nothing changes about your security or our relationship." "Okay." Maria nodded, a mix of curiosity and apprehension on her face. "I've been thinking about what you said, about how you're always a little afraid that all of this could disappear. About how being poor teaches you that security is an illusion. And I realize that I can't expect you to ever feel completely secure while you're dependent on my goodwill, even though I'd never withdraw it." "Alexander, let me finish. I talked to my lawyers. I want to set up a trust fund for Sophia, enough to cover her education, from preschool through college and beyond. I want to put a down payment on a house for you both, someplace that's yours, that no one can take away. And I want to set up the community center we talked about with you as the director, and a guaranteed salary that would be yours regardless of anything that happens between you and me." Maria was staring at him, tears sliding down her face. Alexander, that's too much." "No, it's exactly enough. Because here's the thing, Maria, I don't want you to be with me because you're afraid of losing security. I don't want you to say yes to anything because you feel obligated or grateful. I want you to have your own foundation, your own safety, completely independent of me. And then, if you still choose to be with me, I'll know it's because you want to be, not because you need to be. You'd really give me all that with no strings attached. The only string is that you promise to use those resources to build a good life for yourself and Sophia. That's all I care about, that you both have what you need. Sophia had abandoned her pasta and was rubbing her eyes, ready for bed. Maria stood, holding her daughter, and looked at Alexander with an expression he'd never seen before, something like wonder mixed with complete trust. Before one left me, I had this vision of what my life would be. I'd finish nursing school, we'd get married, we'd raise Sophia together. When he left, that vision shattered, and I thought I'd never have anything close to it again. I thought I'd spend the rest of my life just surviving, just scraping by, always afraid. And now, Alexander asked quietly, now I have a new vision. One that's better than anything I imagined before. Not because of your money or your resources, though those things certainly help, but because you've shown me what partnership can look like, how two people can support each other, lift each other up, build something together. You've given me back hope, Alexander. And love. So much love. Alexander stood, closing the distance between them, wrapping his arms around both Maria and Sophia. Is that a yes? He asked. To the trust fund, the house, the community center, all of it? Yes, Maria said, laughing through her tears. Yes to all of it. And yes to us if you're asking. I'm asking. I'm asking if you and Sophia will let me be part of your family, not as an employer or a benefactor, but as a partner. As someone who loves you both and wants to build a life with you. Then yes, Maria said again, and kissed him with Sophia giggling between them. They put Sophia to bed together that night, both of them singing her lullaby, Maria in Spanish, Alexander in English, their voices blending. When they emerged from the nursery, they stood in the hallway holding hands, looking at each other with the amazed realization that everything had changed and everything was about to begin. Over the following weeks, they made it all real. The lawyers drew up papers. A house in a good neighborhood with a yard for Sophia was purchased. Nothing ostentatious, but solid, safe, filled with potential for a family. The community center found a location, and Maria began the work of bringing her vision to life, throwing herself into the project with passionate dedication. Alexander watched her transform from someone who apologized for existing into someone who took up space confidently, who spoke at community meetings with authority, who was building something meaningful. And Sophia grew too, toddling around the penthouse that had become a real home, surrounded by love and laughter and possibility. 6 months after that first morning, Catherine visited again and found a scene that made her eyes well up. Alexander on the floor building block towers for Sophia to knock down, Maria at the dining table working on grant applications for the community center, the space filled with the messy, chaotic warmth of a real family. You did it, Catherine said to her brother later. When Maria had taken Sophia to her new house for the night, they were slowly transitioning, giving everyone time to adjust. You took something broken and made it whole. We did it, Alexander corrected. All 3 of us together. I don't think any of us are who we were 6 months ago. We've all been changed by each other. A year later, on the anniversary of that first morning, Alexander and Maria stood in the completed community center at the ribbon-cutting ceremony. Sophia, now almost 2 years old, held the scissors with her mother's hands guiding hers. A crowd of women who would be helped by this place stood watching, single mothers, women rebuilding their lives, people who needed exactly what Maria had needed. A hand up, not a handout. Maria gave a speech about second chances, about the stranger who'd seen her at her most desperate and chosen kindness. She didn't mention Alexander by name, that was their private story, but he stood to the side watching, holding Sophia when she got restless, feeling prouder than he'd ever felt closing a billion-dollar deal. That evening, back at the penthouse, their shared home now, officially, they celebrated quietly. Sophia was asleep in her nursery, and Alexander and Maria sat on the terrace where they'd had so many important conversations. "Do you remember what you said that first morning?" Alexander asked. "When Sophia cried, and you thought I was going to fire you?" "I said I was sorry about 100 times. You said, please, I couldn't miss work. Like showing up, even terrified, was the only option you had. And I realized I'd built a world where people felt that way, where their survival depended on never showing weakness, never admitting need, never being human." "And now?" Maria asked, leaning into him. "Now I understand that the best things in life require vulnerability. That letting people in is stronger than keeping them out. That a baby's laughter and a partner's hand in yours are worth more than any fortune. You taught me that, Maria. You and Sophia showed me how to live, not just succeed." Maria kissed him softly. "You gave us a future. But more than that, you gave us dignity. You treated us like we mattered, like we were worth your time and attention and care. You saw us when we were invisible to everyone else. That's what changed everything." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the lights of Manhattan twinkle below them, both aware of how unlikely this love story was, how easily it might never have happened. If Maria had been able to find childcare that day, if Alexander had responded with anger instead of compassion, if either of them had been too afraid to take the risk of opening their hearts. But they had risked, and they had opened, and they had found something neither of them had been looking for but both of them needed. A family built not on obligation or expectation, but on choice and love, and the daily decision to show up for each other, even when it was hard. Inside, Sophia stirred in her sleep and made a small sound. Both Maria and Alexander stood simultaneously, smiling at their shared instinct to check on her. They walked to the nursery together, looked down at the little girl who'd changed both their lives, and then looked at each other with the same thought. This is what matters. This is what it's all about. Love that starts with compassion. Family that's built on kindness. A future that's created one brave choice at a time. And it had all begun with an apology that should never have been necessary, spoken by a woman who'd been strong enough to keep fighting and brave enough to accept help when it was offered. In the end, they'd saved each other. And together, they'd built something beautiful.